I was looking at the source material for today, and I realized something kind of uncomfortable about how I view health.
Oh, what do you mean by that?
Well, I've always thought of diabetes as a strictly behavioral disease. You know the narrative. You eat too much sugar, you don't move enough, you get sick.
Right, the old too much dessert theory?
Exactly. It feels like this simple, almost judgmental cause and effect loop. Like if you have it, you did something wrong.
Yeah, that is a very common narrative. But honestly, it is a incredibly dangerous oversimplification.
Which is exactly what I figured out when I started reading through this seminar by Dr. Rajneesh Gupta. It's from the Maharaja Agrasen Institute of Management Studies, or MAIMS.
And he pulls a lot of his insights directly from the International Diabetes Federation's 2025 Atlas data.
Yes, and that simple behavioral narrative, it falls apart completely. It is not just a sugar problem, it's a crisis of mechanics.
It is. And to be very precise here, it is a metabolic crisis.
Yeah.
What Dr. Gupta's presentation does, it forces us to look under the hood of the human body. We aren't just talking about high blood sugar. We are talking about a fundamental breakdown in how the body processes energy. And the scale of this breakdown is, well, staggering is an understatement.
Let's actually start right there, just to ground the listener in the reality of this, because the numbers in the IDF Atlas are huge, but the growth rate is what really jumped out at me.
It's alarming. Globally, we're looking at about 60 core, so that's 600 million patients today.
600 million.
Yes, that is roughly 11% of the adult world population. And by 2050, that number is projected to hit 85 core, or 850 million.
So we are marching towards nearly a third of the global population.
We are. But, and this is the critical part for us to really understand today, India is outpacing that global average significantly.
We're basically winning the race that nobody wants to run.
Unfortunately, yes, India currently has roughly 9 crore, or 90 million patients, and that is expected to nearly double to 16 crore by 2050. But the statistic that Dr. Gupta highlighted, the one that should actually keep public health officials awake at night, it isn't the total number. It's the missing number.
You're talking about the undiagnosed percentage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The 43%.
I mean, just pause on that for a second. That is nearly half. That means if you are sitting in a room with two people who have diabetes, statistically, one of them probably has no idea.
Precisely. They are walking around with this metabolic damage and have absolutely no clue. They attribute their fatigue to just working too hard or their weight gain to getting older.
Or they think they're just thirsty because it's hot outside.
Exactly. They are flying completely blind. And that ignorance is often due to just a lack of awareness or misconceptions about what the disease actually feels like in those early stages.
And that is exactly why this deep dive is necessary. We need to move past the eat less sugar advice and understand the actual biology. Because if you are listening to this and you're in that 43%, you might not get a warning sign until it's entirely too late.
That's the terrifying truth of it.
So let's get technical. Dr. Gupta kept using the term metabolic syndrome, or syndrome X. How is that distinct from just saying someone has diabetes?
Think of diabetes as the label we give the end result, the high sugar. Metabolic syndrome is the engine failure that actually causes it.
Okay, so it's the root cause.
Right. Historically, it was called Syndrome X because doctors kept seeing this mysterious cluster of issues appearing all together. High blood pressure, abdominal obesity, cholesterol issues, and sugar processing problems.
They were all showing up as a package deal.
Exactly. And eventually they realized these aren't separate diseases. They're just different faces of the exact same metabolic malfunction.
So the high blood sugar is really just the exhaust fumes. The engine trouble starts much, much earlier.
Years earlier. Maybe even a full decade earlier.
Uh-huh.
And to understand that trouble, we have to look at the starvation in the ocean analogy that Dr. Gupta uses.
I loved this analogy so much. It really made the whole thing click for me. Walk us through that.
Okay, imagine a sailor stranded on a lifeboat in the middle of the ocean. He is surrounded by water, miles and miles of it, but he is dying of thirst. Why?
Because he can't drink salt water. It's right there. It's touching him, but it's completely useless to him.
Correct. Now look at a diabetic's body. The bloodstream is the ocean. It is flooded with glucose, sugar. There is plenty of energy floating around. In fact, there is too much energy.
But the cells...
The cells are the starving sailor. They're literally starving to death because they cannot access that glucose.
They're surrounded by fuel, but they just can't use a drop of it.
And that is where insulin comes into play. Insulin is the key. In a healthy body, Insulin unlocks the cells so the glucose can enter and be burned for energy.
Makes sense.
But in type 2 diabetes, you usually have one or two major problems. Either you don't have the key, which is insulin deficiency, or, and this is incredibly common, the lock itself is jammed.
Insulin resistance.
Yes, you have the key. You might actually have way more keys than a healthy person because your pancreas is just frantically pumping out insulin, trying to force the door open.
But the receptors on the cells just aren't responding. The lock will not turn.
Exactly. And this distinction between the key missing and the lock jamming is absolutely crucial, especially for the demographics Dr. Gupta discusses.
Right, because you mentioned that in the Indian population specifically, the jammed lock scenario is far more common.
It is the dominant phenotype. We very often see patients with exceptionally high insulin levels. Their body is screaming to be heard, but the cells are essentially deaf.
And this leads to that massive domino effect that Dr. Gupta outlines. Because when cells starve, they don't just sit there quietly and accept it, right?
Oh no, they take drastic destructive measures to survive.
This was the part of the seminar that surprised me the most, I think. Most people assume that if you have diabetes, you just have all this extra energy in your blood. But you are saying the body actually thinks it's starving, so it starts cannibalizing itself?
Precisely. It goes into pure survival mode. If it cannot get glucose into the cell for energy, it desperately looks for an alternative fuel source. So it starts breaking down your protein stores.
Your muscles.
Your muscles. This is a condition known as diabetic sarcopenia. The body literally eats its own muscle tissue just to keep the lights on.
Which perfectly explains why some undiagnosed diabetics lose weight rapidly, but they look, I don't know, frail. They don't look fit, they look depleted.
They get that skinny fat look. They lose muscle mass in their arms and legs, but they retain the central belly fat. And this muscle breakdown, it's a terrible double-edged sword.
Because of the waste products, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not only do you get physically weaker, but breaking down protein releases nitrogen and urea into the bloodstream.
Which the kidneys then have to filter out.
Yes. So now visualize the sheer stress on the kidneys. You have this high blood sugar acting like coarse sandpaper on your delicate blood vessels, actively destroying the filters.
And simultaneously?
Simultaneously, you have a massive overload of urea from the muscle breakdown, stressing that exact same filtration system. You are attacking the kidneys from two different sides at once.
That directly connects the muscle loss to the kidney failure risk. I had never made that connection before.
It really underscores that this isn't just about sugar. It is a total systemic collapse.
It really is. But before the kidneys fail, there is another organ that takes a massive hit. The liver.
The liver is often the canary in the coal mine, isn't it?
It's usually the very first domino to fall. Because remember, all that excess glucose floating in the ocean of blood. The body has to put it somewhere. It can't just leave it in the blood forever because glucose is highly toxic in large amounts.
So it shuttles it off to the liver and converts it into fat.
Resulting in fatty liver. Dr. Gupta mentioned that if you were to ultrasound 100 random people in a modern urban setting, 90 of them might show grade 1 fatty liver. 90%. That is wild.
It is the silent precursor to everything else. That fat eventually spills over into visceral fat, the dangerous belly fat, which, in a very cruel twist, actively releases inflammatory chemicals that make the insulin resistance even worse.
So it's a closed loop. The more belly fat you have, the more resistant you become, which just leads to even more fat storage.
A completely vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And this brings us to probably the most controversial part of the entire seminar, how people try to break that cycle.
Oh, yes. Because we live in the era of the Instagram dietitian. Everybody is talking about keto, zero carb, and intermittent fasting.
It's everywhere.
I have friends who swear by the 16-hour fast. It's almost like a religion at this point. They tell you it resets the metabolism. But Dr. Gupta's take on this for diabetics specifically was a very hard no.
It was a very firm, very urgent warning. And to understand why, we just go back to the starving sailor. If you are a completely healthy person, fasting forces your body to burn fat efficiently. That is fine.
But if you're diabetic?
If you are a diabetic, your cells are already starving. They are already in a state of deep metabolic panic because they can't get glucose.
So if you fast, you're just piling more stress onto a system that is already failing.
You are literally pouring gasoline on a fire. When a diabetic body is forced to burn fat rapidly, whether because of a long fast or a super strict keto diet, it produces chemical byproducts called ketone bodies.
And those are acidic?
Highly acidic.
Yeah.
And if the acid levels in the blood get too high, you enter diabetic ketoacidosis, or DKA.
Which is lethal.
It is a life-threatening medical emergency. You end up in the ICU. Dr. Gupta was very explicit about this. Diabetics should not do long fasts.
So what's the alternative then?
The goal isn't to starve the body into submission. It's to provide a slow, steady trickle of fuel. He recommends small, frequent snacks to keep the metabolic engine running without flooding it, but also without stalling it completely.
That is such a significant deviation from the popular fasting cures everything narrative online. The nuance really is that what works perfectly for a healthy metabolism can be actively dangerous for a broken one.
Context is absolutely everything in medicine. And the exact same logic applies to the herbal cure myths. You know, the ones,
Yeah.
the methor water, the ajwain water, soaking okra overnight.
Oh, I see those forwarded on WhatsApp constantly.
Yeah.
Cure your diabetes in 10 days with this one magic seed.
It's the hope that kills you, really. Look, Dr. Gupta didn't dismiss them entirely. He called them supplements. They do have some mild benefits.
But they aren't a cure.
No. Thinking you can replace a sophisticated hormone deficiency or a massive cellular receptor failure with fenugreek water is just dangerous. It's like trying to put out a roaring house fire with a plastic water pistol. It won't hurt, but it's definitely not going to save the house.
Speaking of saving the house, we have to talk about the biggest buzzword in this entire space right now.
Yes.
Reversal. There is a massive industry now selling diabetes reversal programs. But Dr. Gupta used a metaphor that really challenges the entire concept of reversal, the snake in the basket.
This is the one takeaway I really want listeners to remember today. Dr. Gupta argues forcefully that you cannot cure diabetes in the traditional sense. Once that metabolic machinery is broken, it is broken.
So what are these programs actually doing?
What you can do is put it into remission.
Remission versus cure. What is the practical difference for the listener?
The snake. Imagine your diabetes is a highly venomous cobra living in a wicker basket right in the middle of your living room.
Okay, terrifying, but I'm with you.
You can put a heavy lid on that basket. That lid is your strict diet, your daily exercise, your medication. As long as that lid is clamped down tight, the snake is trapped. You are totally safe. Your blood work looks normal. You feel great.
That is the remission.
That is remission. But the snake is still in the basket.
It never actually leaves the house.
It never leaves. The moment you think, oh, I'm cured now, I can go back to eating whatever I want and I can stop walking every day, you are lifting the lid, and the snake will bite you.
Wow.
He mentioned seeing patients who achieved amazing results, stopped all their lifestyle changes thinking they were healed, and came back 6 months later with irreversible kidney damage or permanent vision loss.
Because they let the snake out. So it's a lifelong management proposition. It's about waking up and keeping the lid down every single day.
Exactly.
Which naturally brings us to the actual tools of management, specifically medication. And there is just so much fear and misinformation here. I have heard so many people say, I refuse to take metformin because it will ruin my kidneys.
That is a classic case of confusing the firefighter with a fire. Dr. Gupta was incredibly clear and emphatic about this. The medication does not destroy your kidneys. The disease destroys your kidneys.
The sandpaper effect we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Uncontrolled sugar creates that damage. The medication is the shield protecting the kidney.
But is metformin actually safe long-term? Because people read the list of side effects on the bottle and they just panic.
It is quite literally one of the most studied pharmaceutical drugs in human history.
Yeah.
Dr. Gupta noted that the therapeutic window, meaning the safe dosage range, is up to 2.5 grams. Most doctors only prescribe 1.5 to 2 grams.
So it's well within the safety margins.
Very much so. And for the Indian phenotype, we discussed that jammed lock, insulin resistance group drugs like metformin or preoglitazone are absolutely essential because they sensitize the body. They literally help unjam the lock.
He also touched on insulin injections, specifically the fear that once you start taking insulin, you can never stop. That is a massive psychological barrier for a lot of people.
It is huge, but it's just another myth. He calls this the insulin addiction fear. But physiologically, if your body is still producing some insulin, which many type 2 diabetics are using external insulin, just gives your exhausted pancreas a much-needed break.
It lowers the overall glucose toxicity in the blood.
Exactly. And once those levels stabilize and the toxicity drops, the pancreas can very often recover some of its function. Dr. Gupta says he routinely weans patients back off injections and onto oral pills.
So it's not a life sentence.
Not at all. It's a temporary support beam to hold the roof up while you work on fixing the foundation.
That is a remarkably hopeful way to look at it. It's a tool, but I think we have to pivot now to the consequences of not using those tools. The complications segment of the seminar was incredibly heavy. We touched on kidneys earlier, but Dr. Gupta really emphasized how silent this damage can be.
That is truly the scary part. He discussed nephropathy, which is kidney disease. A patient can have a GFR, that's the glomerular filtration rate, as low as 7.
And for context, what should a healthy person's GFR be?
A healthy person is usually well above 90. At a GFR of 7, you are in end-stage renal failure. You need dialysis. Yet, the patient might still be passing urine completely normally. They feel absolutely no pain.
That is terrifying. You could literally be at death's door and feel totally fine.
Until the day you just collapse.
Yes.
And the exact same stealthy damage happens to the heart. You can have perfectly normal blood sugar on a specific Tuesday, but because of the underlying metabolic syndrome, your triglycerides are sky high.
And triglycerides cause blockages.
Silent blockages. And suddenly, a seemingly healthy 40-year-old has a massive fatal cardiac event.
And the eyes as well.
Retinopathy. You get these tiny microbleeds on the back of the eye, on the retina. You don't feel them at all until one day, a clot blocks your vision completely. Plus, cataracts start appearing in your 50s instead of your 60s. The disease basically accelerates the aging process of every single organ system.
And then there's the one that makes everyone cringe, diabetic foot.
Yes. The loss of sensation in the extremities. You step on a sharp tack or you get a tight shoe blister, and you simply don't feel it because the nerve endings are dead.
And because the circulation is so poor from the damaged vessels, it doesn't heal.
Exactly. Gets infected, it turns into a non-healing ulcer, and that is a direct path to eventual amputation. He also briefly mentioned the brain, noting a very high link between metabolic syndrome and the early onset of Alzheimer's and dementia.
Okay, we have thoroughly terrified everyone listening, which, to be fair, is necessary given that 43% undiagnosed statistic we started with. But let's pivot to the actionable stuff. If we want to make sure we aren't part of that statistic, how do we get diagnosed properly? Because the criteria Dr. Gupta laid out had a very specific catch regarding the post-meal blood test.
I'm so glad you caught that because almost everyone, including some clinics, gets this wrong. The standard advice is simple enough. Fasting sugar above 126 is diabetic. That's a clear line.
Right, but the postprandial test, the PP test that you take 2 hours after eating, that one is tricky.
Very. Usually people just eat their normal breakfast, maybe some toast, eggs, a cup of tea, and then they go give blood.
Which seems logical.
It seems logical, but it is clinically flawed. A specific breakfast varies way too much in its actual sugar content. Maybe you had a little less jam on your toast that day, or you ate more protein. Dr. Gupta emphasized that the medical definition of the 200 limit applies strictly after consuming 75 grams of pure glucose.
So if you want a real, accurate diagnosis, you can't just eat a paratha and go to the lab. You need to do the oral glucose tolerance test properly.
Exactly. If you really want to know your true metabolic status, you have to drink the standardized glucose solution. You have to really stress test the engine. If your numbers spike above 200 after that specific load, you have the diagnosis.
And of course, an HbA1c blood test coming back above 6.5 is the final red line.
Correct.
He also mentioned genetics. If you have a family history, are you just doomed?
Not at all. While there are over 41 different genes mapped to diabetes risk, your lifestyle determines when and if those genes actually express themselves. You can use your lifestyle to postpone the disease almost indefinitely.
Okay, so let's say we have the diagnosis, or we are in the danger zone and we want to postpone it. What is the actual prescription? And I don't mean the pills. Dr. Gupta was very specific about the type of exercise required. It wasn't just a generic go to the gym advice.
No, he heavily champions two very specific things, walking and strength training. But he is specific about the why.
Let's start with the walking.
He suggests a target of a 5-kilometer walk. Walking is rhythmic. It engages the large muscle groups in the legs constantly and consistently, which helps burn off that free-floating glucose in the blood.
It's like idling the car engine just to burn off the excess fuel in the tank.
That's a great way to put it. But walking alone is not enough to stop the muscle wasting we talked about earlier, is it?
No, I imagine not.
Right. To fight the sarcopenia, that muscle cannibalization, you have to lift weights. You have to do resistance training at least 3 days a week.
Why is that so critical?
Because you need to send a loud chemical signal to your body that says, I am actively using these muscles. Do not eat them for fuel.
That is such a powerful way to frame it. You are literally telling your own body what it is allowed to break down and what it has to keep. And what about on the diet front?
High protein is the priority, assuming your kidneys are still healthy enough to process it, because you need the raw materials to repair and build that muscle. Moderate fat is perfectly fine, and you need to restrict your carbs. but do not completely eliminate them.
Again, it comes back to balance. Keep the snake in the basket, but don't starve the sailor on the ocean.
It is a very delicate, intentional balance.
Looking back at all of this data, the biggest shift for me is just realizing that we have been fighting the entirely wrong battle for decades. We have been fighting sugar, but we really should have been fighting metabolic dysfunction from day one.
Dr. Gupta ended his seminar with a thought that really stuck with me. He said, we spend so much time and anxiety waiting for that high sugar diagnosis. But the fatty liver, that happens years before, the insulin resistance, years before.
So if we just sit around waiting for the blood sugar test to finally come back bad, we are already incredibly late to the party. The house is already half burned down.
Exactly. We need to stop reacting to the symptoms and start treating the metabolism proactively. If you have belly fat, if you are highly sedentary, don't wait for the number 126 to appear on a lab report. Assume the engine needs maintenance right now.
That is the ultimate message of this deep dive. Treat the engine, not just the exhaust fumes.
And please, share the knowledge. If 43% of people don't know they have this, tell your family, tell your friends. The myths, like the fasting cures or the deep fear of medication, they're actively keeping people sick. Breaking those myths is the very first step to actual health.
Well said. I think that is a perfect place to wrap up this deep dive. We hope this exploration gives you a much clearer picture of what is actually happening inside that metabolic machine of yours. So stay curious, stay active, and please keep that lid tightly on the basket.
Goodbye, everyone, and take care of yourselves.